Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the savings may not actually be there on a unit that new, because even at that time, they were 80, 85% efficient. So,
You know,
Wonderful.
okay, how are you doing?
that's a good question. That's a good question.
Game last night, give you a heart attack?
From what items do the customers get the greatest savings, and from what items, or just demand reduction?
Yeah, and maybe break game. The game last night give you a heart attack? Me too. Basketball, like, I'm calmer in football games than I am in that. Basketball just stresses me out. Especially in the first half when we fell down by 7 or 8 points. It was tough.
April 29th. It should be at the back of the packet, or at the bottom of the packet, please. He told me that was when it was, and had me go ahead and send it to everybody, so. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, that's what he told me, so. Okay.
All right, I think we've got everybody here. Ms. Kane is on travel, so she's with us. She's not with us today, and so is Mr. Gray. So, with that, why don't we go ahead and call the roll, Ms. Davis?
Ms. Kane? Mr. Dobbins?
Here.
Mr. Donahue?
Here.
Mr. Eads?
Here?
Mr. Leafy?
Here.
Mr. Reynolds?
Here.
Mr. Shanks?
Here.
Ms. Williamson Branch? Here.
And I understand Mr. Haley will be, you'll be sitting in for Mr. Gray. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Do we have any announcements that we need to make at this point in time? Okay, there is probably one announcement that we need to cover, and that's a change in the Danville Utilities meeting for April and May. It's been, we run into a holiday problem in May with the regular scheduled meeting. So there's a proposal to move the date to April 29th, and that would cover both April and May. And by doing that, we've actually put it in between the 2 months. The regularly scheduled meeting for April was April 22nd. Does that work okay with everybody here on council?
I'm not sure yet. I may have a conflict. I may have some travel that week, but
Yeah, I actually have a conflict also that week. I thought this was it had been proposed that it was scheduled, but I didn't get a confirmation back. We have to actually post this 30 days ahead of the meeting. So what we need to do is make sure that we've got a quorum available for that day. So why don't we work offline to make sure that that's going to work? But there was kind of an oversight that occurred.
I'll know this week what my schedule looks
You'll
like.
know this week. Yeah, we would need to know before the 29th, like the 28th. And I'm the same way. I'm going to have to reschedule. And I'll have to check with Ms. Kane to see if she's available if I'm not here. Okay? All right. Any other announcements that we need to make at this point in time? Excellent. So first item on the agenda is minutes of the February 25th, 2019 commission meeting. You'll find those are included in the pack that was distributed to the commission members. Do we have any changes, edits, deletions that need to be made?
Chairman, I move we accept the minutes as presented.
Mr. Dobbins, I appreciate that. So we've got a move to accept. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. Thank you. Next item that we have on the agenda is a review of the utilities financial statements. These were not included in your packet. Ms. Davis sent us a link to actually be able to pull this down. Thank you very much, Janet, for making that available for us. Hey, how are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
Good. So, how are we doing?
We're doing well.
We're doing well? Good.
Yes, sir.
That's good news.
Today we are reviewing the January statements, which completes the first 7 months, or 58.3% of fiscal 2019. The wastewater fund begins on page 12. The wastewater fund reports operating revenue of $5.9 million, which is ahead of the budget at 60.8% and shows an increase of 4.6%, or $256,000 from last year. Operating expenses are within budgeted levels at 49%. Total operating expenses are 5.2% higher than the prior year, with a net increase of $342,000 in distribution for the purchase of a sewer truck, offset by a reduction in outside purchase services for manhole rehab work. We've discussed that at the last several meetings. Transmission and treatment, service, and administrative expenses are decreased a collective $158,000 from the prior year due to a decrease in general fund allocations, a time difference in contractor payments, and a reduction in expenses for salary and benefits. As discussed in previous months, an additional transfer to the general fund of $3 million was approved by the Utility Commission and City Council subsequent to the adoption of this budget in fiscal 19. With revenues coming in above and expenses contained under budget, and after the aforementioned additional transfer, net loss is reported at $1.2 million, which remains comparable to the modified budget, but is a $2.9 million decrease when compared to the prior year. However, the fund performance does indicate that we will likely close this year in a positive position. The water fund begins on page 13. The water fund reports operating revenue slightly below the budget at 56% and $4.7 million, which is comparable to the prior year, showing a decrease of 2.9% or $141,000. Operating expenses of $3 million are within budgeted levels at 50% and are decreased 10% from the prior year. This decrease is primarily in transmission and treatment due to prior year repairs to the clarifier at the industrial water treatment plant and in distribution for contractors and materials. After including non-operating revenue and expenses, the water fund reports net income after transfers of $1.1 million, which is an increase of 23% as compared to the prior year and compares favorably to the budget at 80%. The gas fund begins on page 14. The gas fund finished the 7-month period with revenues of $13.8 million, reflecting an increase of $1.2 million or 9.7% as compared to the prior year. Year-to-date sales and gas purchases are in line at 61% and 63% of the budget respectively. While year-to-date consumption was 2.9% higher than the prior year, gross margin is down 1% due to a transition this year to a heating season recovery of demand charges. Heating season method recovers demand from mid-October until mid-April and ensures recovery of total demand costs in the fiscal year the expense is incurred. Total operating expenses ran under budget, coming in at $2.7 million or 49% of the budget. Operating expenses are nearly identical to the prior year, reflecting a 0.73% increase, which is about $20,000. Net income before transfers was $3 million, which is ahead of the budget at 77.7% and ahead of the prior year by 43%. The gas recovery was an over-recovery of $115,000 at January 31st. The electric fund begins on page 15. The electric fund reports operating revenue of $72.8 million or 54.7% of the budget, which reflects a 10.5% decrease from the prior year due to a change in the PCA recovery rate. Purchase power costs were in line with sales and budget at 55%. Overall, year-to-date kilowatt-hour consumption increased by 0.09%, or around 530,000 kilowatt-hours compared to the prior year. Municipal consumption decreased 2%, residential increased 0.49%, commercial increased 4%, and industrial decreased 6%.
Would you repeat that?
Repeat those percentages?
Yes, please.
Okay, I will. Municipal consumption decreased 2%, residential increased 0.49%, commercial increased 4%, and industrial decreased 6%. There was a reclassification between industrial and commercial for a key customer, which resulted in that change between the two. Total operating expenses of $11.4 million are in line with sales and slightly below the budget at 54.8%. Total operating expenses are up 6.5% compared to last year, primarily due to an increase of $154,000 in depreciation and an increase in wages and benefits. General and administrative costs also increased primarily due to the timing of the payment of the annual maintenance agreement for the customer information system, along with an increase in allocations and in bond premiums. In addition, bad debt increased $100,000 from the prior year. The fund reports a net loss after transfers of $1.8 million, which compares favorably to the budget at 54.6%. The power cost recovery was a cumulative under-recovery of $7.3 million at the end of the first 6 months. We do expect under-recoveries in the periods of higher consumption. The PCA under-recovery balance improved $866,000 in the month of February. And we do expect the under-recovery to decrease over the next several months with a small over-recovery by October. Now, that does assume that the kilowatt-hour consumption remains according to the budget that we have, and that the power costs come in according to the budget that we have. Telecommunication.
I was going to say, we did pretty well.
Yeah, we're doing well with the PCA recovery.
If you recall, last month, we talked about the fact that we stepped the PCA down
We did.
to .0075 from .020 to soften the blow in the winter. And the fact that we're still making a dent shows that, we are making it up in the market finally, which is what we
Right.
expected to be able to do. And, my compliments to the staff for doing what they've done. This is remarkable. It's very, very good news. Let's just keep our fingers crossed.
That's correct. Telecommunications begins on page 16. Telecom revenue of $622,000 was ahead of the budget at 98%. We talked about in the last several months the contract with Danville Public Schools was extended by 90 days, so we're still seeing the effects of that, the positive effect of providing that service to them that we did not budget for. Purchase services were slightly below the budget at 51% and show an increase of $18,000 compared to the prior year due to the timing of service invoices. General and administrative expenses came in comparable to the prior year at 50% of the budget. The fund reports net income of $142,000, which compares very favorably to the budgeted loss of $350,000. And again, this is a fund that should close the year on the positive side of zero rather than as budgeted. Does anyone have questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Holly. We really appreciate it. So the next item that we have on the agenda is energy efficiency update. Did you want to do introductions, Mr. Haley?
Or I can. I can do it.
Would you do it?
Sure.
That'd be great.
We have with us David Ashley from Nexent. He's one of the energy efficiency consultants that we have for the Home Save program.
Excellent. Hey, how are you today?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing really good, thank you.
All right, so appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation to y'all today, and I'm happy to take any questions either throughout while I'm doing the presentation or at the end. I believe everybody has slides printed out, and I'll also step through slides on the screen here. So this is a summary of the 2018 results of the programs that we administer for y'all. Again, my name's David Ashley. I oversee the contract that we have with y'all to support your energy efficiency programs. So we'll go through 2018 results summary. We have a couple of highlights, one from each of the programs, one from the residential program, one from the commercial program. And just to show you a sample of some of the types of projects and some of the numbers that the customers see that participate in the programs. And then we'll talk about a few of the modifications that we're recommending for the next program year. So 2018 results, starting with the Home Save residential program. 301 projects were completed in 2018. A neat milestone was reached, and that's crossing over 10% of homes touched since 2011 by project count. Total savings, 257 megawatt hours of savings, 102 kilowatts of demand savings, peak demand savings. Those numbers are annual, what we would call first year annual savings. So that's what we're gonna calculate that they're gonna see on an annual basis as soon as for the first 12 months that their energy efficiency project, since it's been implemented. Those savings will continue to persist for the life of that project. And so it's gonna vary based on the life of the equipment. If it's an HVAC system, it's gonna, maybe 15 or 20 years. If it's a shorter life system, it'll be a little bit shorter. So these numbers are total projects, summation of first year annual savings for all projects. So it'll persist over time. Yes, question?
Do you see a common method that's used? It's one of these methods. In other words, the projects accumulatively increase savings by 10%, but are they replacing units, or are they insulation, generally speaking? I mean, what is the majority of the projects?
So what's the breakdown of projects? I don't know off the top of my head. Do you know, Shannon, sort of a percentage breakdown?
Most of it, I believe, is HVAC more than anything.
Okay.
Is what?
With some insulation.
HVAC, there's a little insulation, there's a little bit of windows, but most of it's HVAC.
Yeah, and with HVAC including both equipment replacements and
the tune-ups. Yeah, the
So there's
tune-ups by far is probably the highest number.
Yeah. But lower savings per project for the tune-ups.
How do you measure the savings?
Good question. So the first answer that is sort of humorous is you can't actually measure savings directly, right? Because you're measuring the absence of consumption. So the short answer is you can't. How we actually do it would be, there are a lot of industry standard tools. There are various regional, what we call technical reference manuals that have well-established equations for different measures. And so, for example, like HVAC, for example, it's going to be a function of the old efficiency or SEER value of the old unit, the SEER value of the new unit, times estimates for a number of run hours in a year, which is going to be specific to climate. So we take into account things like the geographical location, what the number of cooling and heating hours are in the year, and then run those calculations to get an estimate on the lower consumption based on the efficiency of the unit, how many hours of the year it's expected to operate. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
I was afraid that was the answer. Thank you.
Okay. And I will say, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but we have done, I don't think we've done any so far this year, but I know that we have done in the past what we call an EM&V exercise, where we actually go out and do more direct measurements. Again, you can't measure the actual missing kilowatt hours, but we can put loggers on and actually measure equipment more directly. The other way that we do it, I'll show you in a couple slides for the highlight, the Home Save and Custom Save highlight, is what's called a bill analysis. And so I will show you before and after bills, which is more of a direct, again, still somewhat indirect, but is a more direct calculation of actual savings. And in this case, it's actually very good. You'll see I was going to give a caveat that I didn't make those numbers up. It really did come in very close to our estimate. Obviously, there's some are above and below because it's an estimate. It's kind of an average.
And you touched on this, but if the average temperature in February a year ago was
average evening temperature was 20 degrees, and this year it was 40.
Right.
How does that play into it?
Yeah, so good question. So it would not impact the initial energy savings estimates because those are based on sort of multi-year average temperature data that's published by industry organizations. So those definitely are not on it. You know, we don't custom calculate for each project based on, you know, what the last 12 months of weather data was and what we forecast the next 12 months to be. So that's definitely sort of a blended average. What would take that into account would be if we did M&V on projects where we're trying to measure directly, then we will get usually pre and post our pre-installation and as much post-installation weather data as possible to actually use direct calculations. We have not, that's not included in these numbers here, that type of analysis. Okay, other
I have a
questions?
question for you. For the results you showed, do you have targets or expectations for what you wanted those numbers to be?
Do you have any? So I'll also mention, I should say I'm somewhat new to this, so I came in the middle of this year, so I haven't, our company has served Ural for for quite a few years actually, so I don't know if there were targets at the beginning of the year
Yeah.
set.
There weren't targets set at the beginning of the year. It's been more or less trying to figure out how to market those efforts to reach more people.
So is there any interpretation of these results in to say that these are good results, in line with expectations, they're not like what you would have expected, or is it really unknown at this point how to interpret the results?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess relative to, I mean, there is marketing happening, so I would say the way we typically would look at participation is first to look at what level of effort is being put in to promote the program, right? So if you promote it, the more aggressively you promote it, the more participation you're going to get. There's probably moderate level of promotion here. It's not zero, but because there's not aggressive targets to try to max out, it's also not super aggressive. So I'd say it's moderate. The other way we'd look at it is just in terms of sort of a cost effectiveness, which is not exactly participation, but from a cost effectiveness standpoint, which those numbers are not shown here in the slides, but those numbers are in the ballpark of what we would expect for a program of this size in terms of incentives versus savings. Does that answer your question? So one of the things that we'll see in a couple slides here is some adjustments that are aimed at increasing participation in certain cases, specifically with heat pump tune-ups. So there are, increasing incentives is always the most obvious way to increase participation, but marketing efforts through some of the marketing channels that exist is the other way to just try to raise awareness. But for some folks, even if they're aware, if the incentive is not enough to make up for, there's still a cost to them. And so if that incentive doesn't buy down the premium cost of the high efficiency equipment, then they're still not going to participate. So it could be awareness. It could also be just upfront first cost that they still have to be willing to put in order to participate.
Sure.
I think the short answer is we'd love to have more participation, plain and simple.
Mr. Shanks, did you have a
I think it was
question?
last year, or maybe the year before last, we decreased the rate that was charged per kilowatt hour for the program. Was that 0.005, or do you know what it is?
I am not sure what
Yeah,
it was
we
before.
reduced the budget pool a couple
Well-
of years ago.
Okay, at the next meeting, can you bring us some information on that? I know the reason why we reduced it was it was not being utilized to the extent that we wanted. But we should keep an eye on that target, as well as we should be, I know we send out stuff in every bill, or just about every bill that promotes the program, but we still need to generate more interest in it. And I think,
Well, if you recall, what we're going to be doing this year is aggressively marketing this to
That's right.
faith-based
Right.
centers of worship.
mhm.
We have, was it 100? How many targets do we have? Do you recall, Janet?
Of the faith-based?
Yeah.
Well, I know we had 94 that potentially were going to be going on to the demand rate.
Right.
And there are 147 total.
147 total, so we felt like we had some capacity to be able to, and I think we were hoping to potentially have an update on that next month in terms of how we're going to market that and campaign it.
And as far as the home save program and the custom save program, we also have been working with the inspections department has been given literature when they go to inspect a property to give to the resident in case they weren't aware that they might be eligible for rebates. And Nexent has started visiting and talking to some of the contractors to make sure that they're making the customers aware of that as well.
This is a little bit off the top, well, it's a lot off the topic, but are we taking that opportunity to also discuss the implementation of perhaps use of gas, natural gas?
Yes, and he will be getting to that in a
Okay,
little bit.
all right, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, other questions? So for home save, $66,000 plus incentives, a little bit over $66,000 to achieve those savings. Custom save, 28 projects, 1,195 megawatt hours of savings, again, first year annual savings, and then 552 kilowatt savings, peak demand savings, and a little over $92,000 in incentives to achieve those. One of the probably the most noteworthy things of a slide like this that's true in any utilities portfolio of energy efficiency programs is the difference between residential and commercial, right? So you can see we spend about 50% more in dollars and get about 5 times the savings, right? From roughly 1/10 of the projects. And so it just speaks to the size difference. There's a lot more potential that's more achievable with fewer projects in the commercial sector, but you reach a lot more customers through the residential sector. And so the numbers, they're not here on the slide, but I think if I recall correctly, and you could do the math if you want to check my math, but roughly 26 cents per kilowatt hour or something, I think, on the residential side, and just under 8 cents per kilowatt hour on the commercial side in terms of cost, just incentives alone. So big cost difference in terms of bang for the buck, if you will, the bang for the energy efficiency program dollar between the commercial and residential sectors. So the other thing that impacts that I wanted to mention was just, again, the number of projects. So your cost to process those, right, is kind of based on a per application basis. So your administrative cost, which is not shown here, is also higher in a residential program because you just have a higher volume of projects. So kind of the cost effectiveness of residential programs is almost universally across the board lower, less cost effective than commercial programs. But those numbers, again, are in line with programs of your size. If you look in certain industry, look at certain industry data, you could see lower cost, per kilowatt hour for programs, but it's because they're at much larger scale. So you get sort of economies of scale that could drive those costs down. Any questions about this slide?
I've got just one question, and this has to do with residential lease facilities. In what bucket are they in?
The residential ones, they fall under the residential program.
So again, a commercially operated residential leasehold would be in the homes.
Yes.
So when we say cumulative 10.1% of homes, we're talking roughly 3,000 housing units, some of which would be multifamily. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I took that number from, I forget which year, but I could look it up, it was from a couple years ago, some kind of, it was in last year's data, number of residential accounts or residential homes. So it's a little bit, a couple years old in terms of that.
Hasn't changed much. We don't have huge construction going on here.
Okay.
At
So
least
then
at
it
this
should be
point in
fairly
time.
accurate.
Maybe someday, so it'd be good.
Is there another question? No. Okay. So the Home Save highlight picked a project that was, I think we looked at the top 5 or 6 by energy savings and then drilled into those and picked this one. So this is one of the higher savings projects. Believe that it listed here, but it was a central air conditioner with gas furnace project. So replacement of that system, $1,400 incentive, estimated 4,650 kilowatt hours annual savings, again, per the sort of standard protocols in the industry for calculating energy savings estimates for first year savings. So we got pre and post data. I think it was done roughly in August, so we had only about 8 months so far on this project. That was done back in 2018. And the bill analysis actually came in pretty close so far. Again, it's 4 months shy, but extrapolating the 8-month savings to to an annual basis comes to about 4,500 kilowatt hours of savings. So that project does seem to be on track in terms of its achieved savings to date, or bill savings. As was mentioned, there are things that can throw that off. Weather can throw that off. Different use patterns in the home that we may not know about. So this is sort of a, there's high-level estimate that is the initial point. This is a next layer down, but certainly there are deeper layers that you can go to try to really get at it, because one of the things that's definitely we see in the industry sometimes, and there are ways to try to take into account, is that people sometimes will operate the home differently once they've done a project, because they think, oh, now I've got, my bills are going to be lower, I've got all these savings, oh, I can bump the thermostat higher or lower, as it were. And so looking at the bill directly is, again, still an indirect way to try to figure out what it would have been with the old system in place. But the way it behaves this year is not exactly the way it was behaving last year in terms of occupant usage, but it's another step closer to the actual savings. So that represents about 34% reduction in annual energy consumption, $625 on the bill reduction, which is about 19%. So significant savings to customers for participating. Again, this was an HVAC measure as an example. So the savings vary and the incentive levels vary, obviously, based on which measure they're participating in. Any questions about this highlight? I'm going to skip this slide because these two are out of order. I apologize for that. Go ahead and do this highlight, the custom save highlight, and then talk about the recommended program changes. So the custom save highlight, I worked with Janet to pull an example. We chose Intertape. They have participated over a handful of years since the inception of your programs. And you can see some of those listed here. I think there's all of those here. So 4 different years that they participated, one of which was last year. Cumulative rebates over that period would be $33,757 for a total reduction of about 176 kilowatts of demand reduction over those 8 years. Again, those are cumulative. Those are, I believe, almost all of these. Yeah, so 3 lighting projects and an air compressor project. So those are all going to have equipment lives that you have years to come. So those savings are what we're expecting you're seeing this year and still for years to come. $50,000 plus annual bill savings estimated from that. So again, on the commercial side, obviously much larger numbers, but they're also paying a much larger annual bill to begin with. So there's just a lot more potential savings there than there are on the residential side on a per project basis. Questions about that one? Okay, so I'm gonna go back a slide now. So recommended program design modifications. This is an exercise we go through annually with y'all, and you can see for the home save here we have 3 items. New SEER thresholds is one. That's an example. Several things fit into that category of recommendations that are based on a couple things. One is market changes, or I should say code minimums. So as you're saying, we're going to provide an incentive for you to go above code. You have to put in code, and so we're not going to pay anybody to put in what's required by code. If you go above that, then that's what the incentive is based on, is paying the difference between the minimum required and what they actually put in high efficiency. So as code goes up, then that threshold needs to necessarily go up, because you don't want to pay for something that used to be premium or high efficiency that's now code, it's required. And so that's one. The other is market participation. So if we see that participants are kind of always going over a certain threshold, or that industry standard, a lot of times what happens, particularly with HVAC systems, is that they stock, suppliers, distributors will stock certain efficiencies. There's not sort of a continuous grade of efficiencies. You don't customize it to the 0.1 SEER value. So they kind of get stock units that people are buying most frequently, and so we try to see what those are, make sure that incentive thresholds are aligned with those sort of industry supply stocks of equipment. So we have a few changes to SEER thresholds for this year. Gas water heaters was asked about earlier, so providing incentives to switch to either instantaneous or heat pump water heaters. Increase HVAC tune-up rebates from $55 to $75. That's again aimed at participation. So there was a feeling that from talking some of the, working with what we call trade allies, which are contractors and suppliers and folks in the field that actually, install products, that bumping that up would help provide, would cover more of their cost in doing tune-ups and hopefully increase participation. We think there's a lot more potential out there for tune-ups that we can get some of just by increasing the rebate there. I'll go ahead and do custom save and see if there are questions. Custom save was just one item that's removing T8s. As you all probably know, LEDs are pretty much here in the market, and it's kind of the standard. So there are not really a lot of commercial T8 lighting projects going in the ground. So it's pretty much going to 100% LEDs at this point. So that's another, again, example of responding to market changes, not providing incentives for things that aren't relevant in the marketplace anymore. Any questions? Yep.
Historically, we've been, and correct me if I'm wrong, but historically we've been given a list of all the best practices that are included in the program and what we're going to change each year. Can that be provided to us at some time? The reason why I say that is we, as utility commission members, get asked a lot of questions, believe it or not. More people watch these meetings than you might anticipate. And that kind of information is good for us to be able to speak intelligently about. Right now, based on this, I really don't know what all the devices are, all the methods, but it would be helpful.
Sure, we can get you a summary.
And the other question I had, and again, every time you repeat it, more people hear it. If I'm not mistaken, or if I'm mistaken, correct me, but the gas incentive that we have now is free gas service to the house.
That's correct.
Based on the fact that there are 2 or more gas-using appliances. This seems to catch the gas water heaters and the gas heat pump. Is there any reason to include gas stoves? Is there any logic in that? In other words, to give the customer several choices of what to, or does a stove just not use enough to matter?
We didn't look at it. I'll defer to you on whether it's.
The other item would be dryers, gas dryers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Yeah, we didn't look at that as the first answer. A couple of thoughts are, it will depend on what your motivation is for having people switch, right? So typically we're looking at, just from an energy standpoint, then it's all about, does it consume less total energy, right? But there are other reasons than just that to sometimes provide incentives. And so whether stoves, I don't know the numbers on electric stove range versus gas top.
I think, and if I'm mistaken, please correct me, but I think Danville Utilities is more interested in providing alternatives to help our customers save money and save energy use.
Okay.
So contrary to what an electric power company might want to do, we're not an electric power company.
Right.
Yeah, and so if that's the primary metric, then yeah, the answer is yes, we can look at that and see what is the cost difference to the end user for operating electric versus gas stove. And if it's better for them to operate gas under your current rates, then we can.
And even vent-free gas logs, which are a nice supplemental source of heat. Bought a new set last year, and my wife loves them, So they're on in the morning and they're on in the evening.
Okay.
And it's really helped us cut down on our heating because we just heat a space versus heating our entire home.
Yeah, the whole home, right.
Yep.
So yeah, we can look at that.
If I could add to that, I've recently put in a couple of thermostatically controlled gas logs. And the results in the strip heat on my heat pump no longer running.
Yeah.
So that's a substantial
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah, ours is thermostatically controlled also. and we open the door, and it keeps my lower unit from going on. They're really good.
Along the lines of Fred's comments, on this recommended modification list, new SEER thresholds, well, we talked a bit about it. I don't know what those are, and really, both those first two items are I'm not sure what we're approving. I'm not necessarily expecting that to be here now immediate, but it's just kind of broad
Yeah.
and vague.
Without having the schedule.
Provide the
It was on
details.
split systems, if I'm correct.
That, I don't remember which units it's on. I'll have to check with our engineers.
I believe it was on the split systems, and it was going from 16 to 18 maybe on one of them, and
Okay.
yeah, you'd have to get back with it. But,
Okay. Yeah, but the answer is yes, that can be provided.
I know DOE's
When would these-
just increased its codes.
When would
sorry,
these be in
what?
The
effect?
DOE, EPA have just increased their requirements
Okay.
this past year.
And remind me what your city code is based on? Is it IECC or
I
do
don't
you have
know.
your own? Okay. So there's different places are based on different things. And some are tracking an older version of the code. That code, IECC usually comes out every 3 years. I think it was 2016 is the last one, so I think it's due. That may be the one you're talking about. Maybe there's a new 2019. Not everybody adopts those immediately, so it kind of depends on what your city ordinance or code is based on as to what those thresholds are for here. Does that answer your question? So we can get those to you. We just
Yeah,
didn't print them
well,
here.
and along with that, which is a great idea, what would be the effective date of these modifications?
This would
Be
be
the next program
July.
here. So July.
Okay, so we could do this at the next meeting
Yeah, this is
with
not.
additional information.
Yeah,
This
well,
next
thank you.
program here.
And I wasn't aware that we were actually rebating for tune-ups. Maybe I missed that.
What? is that?
The HVAC tune-up, we actually do a rebate on those?
You have to be a trade ally, which means you've gone through the protocols that Nixon has established, because there's certain forms that the contractor has to submit. But we have a list of those on our website, and
I mean, I have mine tuned up every year.
been missing
got
out.
Participating then.
Didn't know that.
Was it within the last 90 days?
No, it wasn't. And I certainly, if it was, I would not be asking for a retroactive. That would not be appropriate.
I think if you just pull last year, or the last time we went through these in detail, it was a really good handout that went through everything, outlined
Yeah.
old versus new, the increased.
Excellent.
It was very easy to read and follow.
Yeah. I was thinking it would really be
I've
nice
just
if
been around
we
a
could
while,
get,
that's why I was just,
Yeah, no, we can do that, yeah.
as we're going to these churches, it would really be nice if we could get somebody from the pulpit on Sunday morning to talk a little bit about these. You talk about marketing, they should be marketing these to their membership. If we could provide them with something that they could use, it would probably be very beneficial. But a good way for us to get some easy hit marketing out there for the
Yeah,
program.
get some airtime. That's all I had. Any other questions?
Anybody have any other questions
Yes, I
about
do.
this? Fred?
do they still handle the process of the application and the qualifying? Does his company handle the
They,
qualifying?
they currently do. We are looking at bringing in the processing in-house July 1st. We've had some complaints about the processing being a PO box here and then being shipped to Utah for the processing, and so we're going to move that part in-house.
Is that,
That's just for
That's well,
Home Save.
Well,
Custom Save is
Save's
already done
currently
in-house.
and Home
Yeah.
Save will be moving in-house, and we have a RFP coming up for energy consultant effective July 1st of this year. So if it's Nexen or whoever the next energy efficiency consultant will be, they'll still be responsible for technical assistance and things on that end. but we'll be doing the actual rebates in-house.
Will that require staffing increases here?
Currently, no. I've been told by Jason that should we get an influx one month or something, that we can pull somebody to assist me.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the
y'all's time.
thorough review that you provided us, and we look forward to the, I guess we'll put, would we be able to have the information for next month's
Yes.
meeting and put that
I'll
on the
pull
agenda
all
for a
that
motion?
together.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Let me see. Next item we've got on the agenda, which is the last on our business items, we've got a thin schedule today, is a discussion on the electric high load factor large customer rate. Was anyone planning to introduce this, or do I need to introduce this?
I'm not aware.
He was? Okay. I'm glad I know. What we've done is, in 2016, if you recall, we developed a large customer rate using current market power. And that rate was extended to large customers who had a load factor of 70% or greater, and have an electric load of at least 1.5 megawatts. And this was really driven by the fact that Danville Utilities was uncompetitive when we looked at comparing ourselves to the investor-owned utility market that surrounds us. So we really, quite frankly, were at some risk in terms of our practices versus the practices of those organizations that surround us. So that rate was designed to help retain industry and also to assist our economic development efforts with the recruitment of new companies. So we asked today that representatives from Pittsylvania County have an opportunity to talk to us about how this new rate may or may not have been beneficial to the county. Hi, how are you? Good to see you, Mr. Sides. This is Greg Sides, if anyone doesn't know Greg. And we appreciate you being here to represent the county. I understand that you got a good prospect in town perhaps today, so
Yes,
happy. I don't know if it's whale or trout fishing that you're doing, but hopefully things are going well for you all.
Somewhere in between, a good size though.
All right.
I want to start off by apologizing that your communication was with Matthew Rowe, our Economic Development Director. And there's only one thing that would keep him from being here today, and that is a prospect. I mean, he's that supportive of the project or the proposal that you all have come up with. It's been successful in Pittsylvania County and the city of Danville. So I want to let you know that, send his regrets that he couldn't attend today. But the second thing I wanted to do is something that you all, I'm sure, don't hear enough, which is thank you. That we do feel like this was a good example of the Utility Commission hearing about an issue, listening to the economic development directors from both the city and the county and your local industries, and coming up with a solution that has worked. Mr. Warren will speak a little bit more about how it's impacted our local industries, but I'm sure any of you that have heard anything about economic development, you know just how competitive it is. And it's a challenge. We're competing with our neighbors, and we're competing with our neighbors across the other side of the world. And in this process, when we deal with site consultants, we often hear that industries are looking for a reason to mark you off the list. It's that competitive, that when they come up with candidates, they're looking for reasons to check you off. And utilities can sometimes be one of those reasons. We get requests for information from a major industry, whether it's from VDP or a prospect that we meet on our own, and they will send us a long list of questions, and they want all of this information before they're willing to spend their time to come out and visit and interact more. Again, utility rates can be one of those factors in that checklist. And if you don't make that first cut, then you never get a chance to sell your workforce or your industrial sites or your quality of life. So again, we feel like it's been very important in letting us make it through that first cut, letting us show off our community to its best. We really appreciate what you all have done. We think it helps both in attracting those new industries, but also when we're going out and trying to bring in a new company with new jobs, while that's important, imagine how important it is to the existing industries where you've got such as the Interstate Polymer Group, which you'll hear a little bit more about today. But these are people that are currently working in your community. And we're trying to come up with competitive rates to keep these companies from going to more competitive areas. So these are folks that are your neighbors, that are your family, that is currently working in the community. Saving those jobs is also critically important. And I think you all have taken a good step to help that. So my message relayed from Mr. Rowe, who's directly on the line, is thank you. We think it's been very beneficial and it's been effective for our community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sides. I appreciate your speaking on behalf of the county. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Bob Warren. I'm Chairman of the Economic Development Committee for the Board of Supervisors in Pennsylvania County. I also serve on the Danville, Pennsylvania County Regional Industrial Facilities Authority along with Mr. Shanks. I know most of you already, and I know most of you know me. I have certainly been a champion for regional development here in our region. We suffered a great loss when we lost the textile industry and what's happened with our tobacco industry. And it has taken an effort for all of us to work together. And I really appreciate the commission looking at the high load factor and making a difference in our region with looking at that factor and changing it. We have one of our local companies here today, representatives from Interstate. They employ 300 people within our region. They had an expansion within the last 18 months or so of $30 million and 15 new jobs. That's important as we try to rebuild our region. We've had Panacea, Harlow, Kyocera, BGF, just to name a few. And all of them are impacted by the decision you all made. And I think it's important for the public to know that this is a collaborative effort, that every decision that's made, how removed sometimes people think in the public it is from economic development, it's not. It's a critical component to what you all did. I want to say thank you for that. I personally stand here today too believing that this region is sitting on the cusp of great change and great expansion. And all of the decisions that are made are critical to those expansions. So I'm excited about our region. We have, you've all heard me say it, it's been quoted in the paper many times, that I think we have two superstar economic development directors, in Telly Tucker and Matt Rowe.
Absolutely.
They've done great things over the last 3 years. I wished I'd brought the report that shows how much they've done and how many new jobs have been created within our region. And they certainly have support staff, and that effort couldn't be done without your input and your decisions too. Mr. Chairman, you made a statement a little earlier that someday, I believe it's sooner than later. And I thank you for your efforts and your support, and we will do everything we can on our side to be good partners and work with you all as we try to revitalize our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Mr. Warren, may I ask a question of you?
Yes, sir. I'm filling in for Matt now, so I might not be able to answer.
It's okay. So what more can we do?
Oh,
It's your opportunity. I mean, you represent a large segment of our customer base. It would be inappropriate today if we did not ask that question.
I wasn't expecting that question. You all want to comment? You're here. Now's the time. Let's hear from one of our business folks that says, what can you do? Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you're here, now's the time. He's gonna give you the opportunity. Tell him what we can do.
Well, thank you. I'm Mike Jones. I'm the operations manager at Intertape. I think what you can do is continue to look at the high load factor rate. If there's anything you can do to make it more competitive than it already is, that would help a lot. We've been able to grow over the last 5 years. The high load factor rate that you all implemented in 2016 has helped contribute to that growth. So anything you can do to continue to look at that rate, improve it, will help create jobs. So.
And I would just expand on that and say, again, compliments to you. I know you're trying to look at all of the alternative energies. I know there's some work going on solar farms and some other things that could possibly help reduce the rate. You know, stay the course. That would be my recommendation, continue to try to lower those rates. And I certainly would defer to my partner on the Danville, Pennsylvania County Regional Industrial Facilities Authority. He understands what we need and what we take to, and I'm sure he'll be echoing those sentiments. And I'd like to give that some more thought and share them with Mr. Shanks, and I'm sure he could bring them back.
I think that I would really appreciate that if you did. And let's look at our entire, I mean, we have an entire utilities portfolio. And, you know, we really think that this partnership between the city and the county is extremely important. I travel all around the Commonwealth and other places, and I think we have something going here that's pretty special.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's very special and it's very unique when you have state leaders come and say, Go Virginia is designed based on the model that you all have set between two governing bodies. That should speak volumes to the effort that's being put forth here to change this region.
And I think that's important because, you know, if you went back, you know, say 4 years ago even, you know, unfortunately, I think sometimes the perceptions in Richmond about our area were not so positive. And we think about Secretary Ball being here just a couple weeks ago, and the fact that, you know, knowing that we still have opportunities and we have issues and we have, you know, things that we can do better, the tone and the perspective that our state capital has far different from where it was just a few short years ago. And I want to keep that a rapidly vanishing memory.
So do I. I think respect is a big word, and I do think the governing bodies that we're speaking of right now in particular have a great deal of respect for one another. We don't always necessarily agree on a particular issue, but we can discuss it and come to common ground usually, and it's been a pleasure for me to have served the last 3 years and 3 months, and it has been very important to me to help that effort grow and the regionalism continue to expand, because I think that's the only way that we can be a vital community, a vibrant community, is to have working together in partnership. Because, you know, I would love to see the Schoolfield site be major employer, because I know that Pennsylvania County is going to benefit from that if it happens, and I think that's the same mentality that City Council has. If a big plant goes in on 29, they're going to be excited because they're going to benefit from that too.
Yeah,
so.
As will Caswell County, as will perhaps Eden.
Well, I think it's very
Henry.
evident when you look at the Southern Virginia Regional Southern Virginia mega site. We crossed state lines, and Eden's a big part of that. And you know, that was almost unheard of. It's one thing for two localities to get together in the same state, but when you start looking across state lines, it another uniqueness to our region. So a lot for our citizens to be excited about. Wished I could say a lot more, but you can't right now. But I think we got a bright future.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, Mr. Warren. Yes, sir. Mr. Shanks.
Board of Supervisors member, Mr. Warren and Greg Sides for being here with those positive comments and positive feedback. But it was stated earlier that Danville Utilities made a bold move when they went into the that particular load class. And I feel like I need to mention the two gentlemen that y'all brought with you had a great deal to do with that. And working with Greg, working with Jason. And it was a bold move and it was a difficult move, but it worked. I'm glad to hear it worked in your benefit. With regard to future rates, we're near completion on some old contract purchase power agreements. We have some new contracts with the solar farms in the area, and we're having excellent results in a couple of investments that we have made in power generation out in the west. So although I hate to ever say the rates are coming down, they are certainly not moving up at the rate that they were, and hopefully we'll see some reductions. But it's very, very hard to see reductions as time goes on. But I think we're back on the right track, and I'm glad that this has worked out for you guys and the other industries in the area. And thank you again for the positive comments.
Yeah, and we, quite frankly, without those industries, we aren't able to participate in the purchase power market pool to the advantage that we can. So we want those industries, and quite frankly, if you look at what makes sense for this area, when it comes to materials businesses, when it comes to high-value wood products, when it comes to options for server farms, et cetera, this is a great place to be. So, you know, and I think we see a very focused marketing effort, as you mentioned, from our economic development partners to go after those markets. And we're getting them. We're getting them. So, well, Mr. Eads?
You know, you ask what more can you do, and you know there are great programs that are in place. You know, I of course represent IKEA Industry as a site manager, and we're not eligible for the program. So if you ask what more you can do, yes, certainly it would be a benefit to look to expanding the program in any way. As an example, IKEA Industry really values our coworkers and employees, and it's very important to have downtime of the weekends, and we do a lot to prevent operating over weekends, and especially Sunday if at all possible. But of course that drives the load factor to a lower value and hurts us in meeting the threshold. It certainly has an impact. It puts us at a competitive disadvantage because we do pay high rates. IKEA Industry in Danville pays about $5 million a year in total energy cost, and it is a non-competitive situation when we compare to plants in Poland and Portugal and places like that pay lower rates. And so it would be a benefit to look to expand the program to include other industry.
I think certainly if we're in a position where we can find power strips that are attractive with your demand profile, and I don't know, to be candid, that there are. Generally, power plants don't like shutting down on a weekend. They like 24/7, which is the option that we're currently pursuing. On the other hand, with the overcapacity in the gas turbine industry, perhaps there is an opportunity. And we certainly could look at probing to see if that might be something that could be made available in the market. There's plenty of assets that sit idle. And they sit idle because they're just tuned for peaking demand. And perhaps we might be able to attract some interest that would be an alternative option that we could use. So why don't we take that under advisement? We'll task Jason, and of course Jason's not here, so we'll task him to see what we can do.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other items discussion-wise on the high load factor industrial rate? Okay. At this point in time, let's quickly go through communications, and then there will be a public comment period before we conclude. Earl, anything from you, sir? Thank you. Any of the utility staff have anything that they wanted to update today? Excellent. Commission members, Mr. Dobbins? Paul?
No, thank you, sir.
Ms. Williamson Branch?
No, thank you.
Mr. Shanks?
No additional.
Sir?
No, thank you.
Okay. At this point in time, are there any comments from the public to be made? And the director is not here. Are there any items that you needed to bring up for us today, sir?
And he and I had discussed it as well, so he's familiar with some of my concerns.
All right. And with that, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the county and your industrial representatives